This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Spring Creek Model Trains. Family owned for nearly 25 years, Spring Creek is your destination for model trains. Check out springcreekmodeltrains.com for a wide variety of offerings from today's top manufacturers and exclusive products found nowhere else. Whether in Deschler, Nebraska, or at a train show near you, stop in and say wow. To see where they'll be next, visit their website at springcreekmodeltrains.com. From trackside to roadside and wherever you'd see a sign, Scale Signs has it all. With over 1,400 offerings in N, HO, S, and O scale, Scale Signs has the largest collection of fine scale signs on the planet. Come see the details that bring your models to life on their website, scalesigns.com. If you're looking to bring more realism to your layout industries, look no further than tullymodels.com, the home of Southern Tier Grain Modeler Supply and Steel Mill Modeler Supply. With models to fit steam, transition, and diesel eras, Kevin Tully has you covered with all of the components you'll need to take your grain and steel mills to the next level. Check out the entire catalog at tullymodels.com. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott, so glad you could join us. We're going to be talking about a brand new book from an author we have talked to quite a few times, Lance Mindheim. Lance, welcome back.
Great as always, be back with you, Ray. We always have a great time, so I appreciate you having me on.
Always fun to talk to you, and always fun when you bring a new book under your arm and you're bringing one with you, and we're going to be talking about that and how that's going to help a whole bunch of model railroaders in the planning of their layouts. But before we do that, why don't you bring us up to date? What's been going on with Lance Mindheim since the last time we talked?
Probably more on the work front. As a custom layout builder, I'm kind of in a different niche, and I focus more on the prototype side of things as opposed to the bigger shops that have staffs. And, I hit slow periods where there's not a lot going on, and then you get a huge project that keeps you really busy. And so I've got a CNW project, Alco line, which is on my business site. So I've been spending a lot of time on that, mostly by choice, just because it's a lot of fun, a great customer. But, working 5 or 6 days a week on that. At one point I had 4 layouts, the main one, the downtown spur in the basement, and then 3 small layouts, East Rail, Brooklyn Terminal, and Los Angeles Junction. And it got to be too much. I got tired of tripping over the Brooklyn Terminal layout, and I had to rein myself in. I took all the structures off, which is all the labor hours are in the structures, and carefully packed those away, packed away the rolling stock, and then fours to others. I just put the rest of it in the dumpster, and that was a relief. So got that out of there, renovating the room. And I've got the small Los Angeles Junction. I tend to cycle among the layouts, but the LAJ layout, I've backdated to the 1960s, which isn't that hard. I mean, just change the automobiles and the rolling stock. And so right now, as we speak, I've been playing around with the LAJ layout. Tom Klomoski, who is a mutual friend of ours, got me turned on to mid-century modern architecture. And another friend of mine, Fred Shear, kind of piled on. I'll never have a mid-century home, but now that this room is available with the Brooklyn Terminal out of there, that's been my fun room, the mid-century modern room, and I've been having fun renovating it. So that's what I've been up to since we talked last.
So a little bit of one-to-one scale remodeling and that kind of building, along with some model railroad stuff, and of course the business. When you're doing these builds, how much research is going into all of this when somebody hands you a project and says, hey, Lance, build me, railroad X, and this is the area I want? It must take you kind of down a big rabbit hole, right? To start doing all that research and gathering information for them.
It's a blast because I don't have to do the gathering. These projects take a significant financial investment. And when somebody comes to me, they have the information and they are very passionate about the project. So for the CNW project, and I'm from the Midwest, so I kind of was familiar with it, but he talked me through it on the phone and then he mailed me 3 books, the really high color glossy photos. So it didn't take that long to get up to speed. And a lot of these customers for these bigger projects are CEO types. Are very good at delegating. They spend all their time behind the scenes deciding who they're going to work with. They give you the information and then they kind of let you do the job, which is ideal. So this particular line, the alkaline, there's a lot written on it. So to answer your question, I was having so much fun. I kind of lost track of time, but it wasn't that hard between the books he sent me and the readily available information I had. I generally don't have to do that much research. These guys have already done it.
Well, that's really an awesome opportunity for you, not only as a business, but your ability to put your hands on so many different types of railroad projects.
It really is. People come up with stuff and that's really the joy of. Every job has its stresses, but the joy of mine is these people bring you projects that you just weren't that familiar with, and they are very familiar with. When they know every square inch. I had done a job up in Portland, Maine, on the Guilford, and that was particularly fun. He flew me up, it's only like an hour flight from DC. Got off the plane, we met for lunch, and we just walked the line together. So, it doesn't get much better than that. I don't know, 1 mile long branch. So it wasn't that long, but they have all the information, so there's not that much research involved.
Yeah, when you can get a site visit mixed in with all of that, I'm sure that is quite a thrill to be able to learn all of that firsthand in person.
Yeah, it is.
Well, let's talk about this new book. It's always exciting to see a new publication coming out from you. The new book is titled Industry Planning for Modern Era Switching Layouts. You talk about a lot of times, and a lot of the past conversations we have is about someone's why. So I'm going to ask you about your why. What was your why behind this new book?
You don't want to get into my brain, Ray. It's a scary place. I don't even know. It's if you follow my blog, and we were just talking about your daughter's involvement in the arts, and a large branch of arts is film, and I tend to like more of the independent films. These are smaller audiences. They're not, the typical Hollywood thing where the whole film is a car chase and a fist fight. So I really like the independent ones because they tend to dig a lot deeper into it. And one of my favorite filmmakers is a guy named Sean Baker, who probably the most notable film he did was Florida Project. Billy Bob Thornton was nominated for an Academy Award for his role in that. Most of his others have been much lesser known, but at least to me, they're very well done. Much draw you in more than any blockbuster type. Well, getting to your question, a friend of his who is also a film producer was saying, I have some ideas and I'm trying to decide what's going to be commercially successful. And Sean Baker said, let me stop you there. That is the key to a really cruddy movie. Whatever idea pops in your mind, unless it's clearly outrageous, if you get an idea and your heart's in it, you have to go with it. Because here's the reality, Ray. It's impossible to know going in whether something is going to be, catch the consumer's eye or not. And this particular one, I was joking with myself, and I was going to write a blog, but it was a terrible idea. I didn't. I was going to say the most boring book ever written. And I think the only competition would be Tony Thompson did the Trash Trains of New Jersey, and he ended up on a talk show as Letterman or somebody, and he was a good sport about it. But to answer your question, it just popped in my mind. I'm like, this is the most boring book. I cannot imagine anything more boring than this. But it's like, what the heck? Just go with it because it's a crapshoot anyway in terms of what's going to take off and what's not. It's not even tied to the reviews. Books that get very many, a lot of high star ratings may not necessarily be the best seller. But also tying into your question, just because of the blog and the business and Facebook, I get a lot of incoming emails from people. I try to get it gives me a sense that maybe others don't of where people struggle. And that's really the genesis of all these books in terms of, as a totally detached outsider, where are the tripping points that hold people back in the hobby? And, write a book that might address that. Some people are open to it, some aren't. That's totally beyond my control. But the goal of the book was just to address some areas that people struggle with. I think it's no surprise to you that probably half the hobby I would call fans of the hobby. These are people that were interested since teenagers, and at age 60, they really haven't built anything for whatever reasons that are personal to them. But as a means of engagement, they tend to feel connected to the hobby. They buy stuff. And so at age 30 or 40, they start buying kits. Then at 40 or 50, their income starts ratcheting up. They buy more kits. And at age 60, kids are gone, income is, their all-time peak of their life. They buy more kits. They retire, now they're ready to build a layout. And they have, a lot of them have big houses at this point. You're generally better off at 60 than you are at 20. And they've got these closets full of kits. And the entire design process is, holy crap, I don't even want to think about how much money I've spent on these. How do I jigsaw puzzle these onto a layout surface? And can't. That's the classic case of the tail wagging the dog. I mean, the right way to do it is to come up with a theme, figure out what structures need to support that, and then go out and get them. I guess I'm the bearer of bad news, but that's not the way to approach layout design. The other trap I see people falling into is that you and I are probably, in our mutual friends, are more on the prototype side of things. But a lot of these structures that we would pick maybe don't have a lot of commercial upside as kits. What does have commercial upside are the characters, the quirky, the pickle factories, the vinegar works, and the manufacturers know that. I don't blame them. I would do the same thing. So these people pick kits based on the artwork on the kit cover or how cool they are. And again, you're in the same trap. You've accumulated them with no end goal in mind, just because they look cool on an individual basis. And then you're stuck. You hit that point where life circumstances have held you back, and now at retirement you have the time. All those purchases, being the bearer of bad news, really have not done you that much. I mean, you can scavenge some parts from them, but again, the book was try to steer people clear of those traps.
It sounds like a very familiar theme. We have talked on the podcast with Matthew Fricks on the same topic, but regarding rolling stock. And it's really the same thing with industries as well. We love to go to a hobby shop and we see the new shiny car, the new shiny whatever, and we buy it. And then you start to pick a railroad, and then you find out it doesn't fit. Like, they never pulled this car through their railroad ever, or nor would they ever. And then you end up with all this stuff, or that, like you're talking about, that big closet full of things that have accumulated over the years, and seemingly all because of a little bit of maybe analysis paralysis, or maybe even better, the great Dave Ramsey might say, that problem of ready, aim, 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 and then you never pull the trigger. So getting to the point where you get that finger wrapped around it and you pull that trigger.
That's exactly right, I think. And we live in an age that's a lot more different. And human psychology is interesting. I mean, there's a dopamine rush which comes from hitting that buy button on something. It's easier, at the end of a long day of work, to sit down and go on Amazon or one of the big websites and scroll and buy stuff than to actually put something together. So I think that when you and I were younger, we had no option. We could pick up the magazines and we could browse through them. But then, even then, you had to write a check, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it. It wasn't that. I mean, you're
Right.
younger than I am, but it wasn't that easy. So I think that for all of the advantages of modern age, the disadvantages, it's awful easy to surf the net as opposed to build stuff.
Yeah, maybe that is slightly a downfall. I mean, I talk about living in the golden age of model railroading, and one of them is the information at our fingertips. But sometimes it can be too much, or maybe causes that confusion, right? Because there's so much out there. So you really need something to kind of bring you back into focus and really start to explore your why, which is something you've focused on a lot, but then figuring out how to execute a plan from the why.
You're exactly right, Ray. But a big part of that is also self awareness, which is we all think we know ourselves. And the reality is we really don't. But a big part of layout planning is understanding where our enjoyment comes from. And, not being dissuaded because we don't think it's cool. I mean, if your interest is in building rolling stock, then go for it. But you don't, if you're interested is building rolling stock, you don't need a layout with 75 turnouts because you're just not going to use it. Or if your interest is building a smaller layout like Sebastian SG, we were just talking about, probably one of the best in the world, there's nothing wrong with just having 3D artwork on the wall. I mean, everybody's interest is different, but you getting to the one of the points in the book is you have to understand what your area of interests are in the hobby and where your enjoyment's going to come from. And again, being the bearer of bad news, the only way you can do that is jump in the pool. Cut down on the forum time, the Facebook time, get a plank up on the wall, make your mistakes. And it's only by building layouts, maybe two, three, four of them, that eventually you'll hone in on what your areas of interest really are. And then once you know what that area is, only then can you build a layout that focuses clearly on that. And I think the reality is, talking to my friends of mine, we all say that we're these great operators. And I do want a layout that operates, but if I think of all my friends, it's pathetic how little we actually operate the layouts. Most of the guys, they spend most of their time building them, probably 90%. And these are beautiful layouts. And I asked, "Oh, what have you been up to 3 months?" And they explained everything they've built. I said, "Have you been running it?" Nope. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it
Yeah,
because they're happy. But you just have to be aware of it. And then the operators they are very outgoing, prolific, excellent writer groups, which gives the impression that they are in the majority. They are a very small section of the hobby. And if you are a dyed in the wool pure operator, I don't even know if it needs the scenery is not even that important, really. It's the track. Big joke. I don't know if you know Steve King, friend of Tony Custer's, is people would give him as a gift. They would mail him a tree. Say, "This will be your first tree." But he was a former B&O operator, and his interest is in operations. So again, the scenery wasn't that. When I operated on his layout, I had a great time, but there was no scenery. So again, the why is really understanding yourself, and you can't do that just spending hours writing 5 paragraph missives on all the forums.
absolutely. Yeah. I've kind of jokingly said this, and maybe I'm slightly hypocritical about it, but you can only talk or in some cases write about the hobby so much, and then you actually got to go do it. And that's something that's tough for some folks to do, and get that thing started and get beyond that analysis paralysis, or get beyond and find what you really want to do with the hobby and go do it. And if it is just to write, or if it is just to whatever, but if you have this dream or this plan to have a layout, you got to go to it.
That's exactly right. And my name has become associated with switching layouts. And I think it would be surprising for people to hear is I'm not an advocate of switching layouts. I don't really care that much about them one way or the other. But what I am an advocate of is what we've been talking about, is getting involved in the hobby. And switching layouts and smaller layouts provide a platform to get out of the armchair and modeling. And we all have our hot buttons. Mine is that people associate switching layouts with those that are destitute, that live in the back room of a trailer and all they can afford is that 1x4 plank, which is not true. The biggest resource is time and energy. And if you get home from a long day of work, you've got your work responsibilities, family responsibilities, you're tired, not physically, but mentally. And a switching layout is an opportunity to get into the hobby, to learn all the basic skills without being overwhelmed by a massive layout. And many of my customers who are very well off financially have substantial homes. Their layouts are not that big for the most part because they're busy and they understand how much they can handle. So that's really where I'm coming from with the switching layout is they're a platform for getting involved in the hobby and learning everything you need to know because let's say you have a 10 by 10L switching layout and then you retire, your responsibilities drop off, you have more time, and let's say you have a 20 by 40 basement. At this point, you know everything you need to do. It's just a matter of repeating what you did on that small layout. But what happens with a lot of people is you get to age 60, 65, you retire, and they haven't even so much as put together an Athearn blue box. So they've lost all this time that they needed to accumulate the basic skills. And that is not the time to embark on a triple deck 20 by 80 layout without having any experience.
Do you think that maybe some of the analysis paralysis that some of us come up with may also be because we think that the layout that we're working on now has to be our forever layout?
Yes, absolutely. That's an excellent point. And it doesn't. I'm looking at all my friends. I have a good buddy, about 20 minutes away, Kelly Reagan, who has an excellent design. And I was talking to him, and it's his fourth layout. And the reason this one is so good is because of the other three. And I think back in the age, and that goes back maybe to the 70s or 80s, there was that feeling that it had to last forever. It doesn't. There's nothing wrong with that because you can recycle so much of the material. Model railroading, the cost structure is kind of the inverse of what it should be. All the money is in the beginning. You have to get your locomotives, the control system, the switch machines, and the track. So you get 3 or 4 years into a layout and you decide you want to go in another direction. Almost everything on there can be used again. The control system, the turnouts, the switch machines, the throttles. So then the second one, and even some of the bench work maybe, is going to be a fraction of the cost. So it doesn't, you're 100% right. Yeah, if you think it has to be forever, then there's a lot of pressure to make it perfect. If you're thinking it just has to keep you entertained for however long you want it to, and then when you're done with it, you just pull the material off and recycle it, takes a lot of the pressure off.
I mean, you started at the top of the show telling us about how you got sick of tripping over the Brooklyn terminal and tossed it in the garbage, right? But you did save a bunch of stuff off of it so that if you decide to do another layout of another form, you still have it. But even Lance Mindheim is not afraid to throw away his work and start anew or start on something else.
Oh, I'm a minimalist. I'm not afraid to throw things in the trash. But even getting back to the Brooklyn terminal is my first substantial layout. Many remember this goes back a long time ago, was an N scale layout of the Monon Railroad in my hometown. I got to the point where it had served its purpose, and again, it was time to move on. But again, I pulled all of the structures off and saved all the rolling stock and carefully packed them away. And when the Brooklyn terminal came around, I mean, a lot of the structures from the Monon layout, I pulled them out of the box and saved a lot of time.
Now, like you've said before about scenery, and I think buildings are kind of the same way, that they translate well in different areas, kind of the same look, same buildings, unless you're getting to something that's completely unique architecture. A lot of it seems to translate from place to place.
I don't know if this is a good or bad thing. I mean, I'm a U.S. domestic tourist, but if you took the structures from Portland, Maine, one of my favorite cities, and you go to Topeka, Kansas, there is not much difference. Which get right to your point. There
Right.
are huge swaths of the United States that I'm sorry don't look that much different. The Alco line, southern Minnesota does not look that much different than northern Indiana. It doesn't. So you're right. You can recycle stuff pretty easily.
So we talked about some of the problems that model railroaders run into. Let's talk about this book and how it can start to help them head in the right direction.
Well, a lot of it really, and we've talked about, there's always the expression, it's my railroad, I can do what I want. And that always makes me bristle. There is something self-righteous because of course it's your railroad, you can do what you want. A, that's true. And B, nobody really cares what you do. Nobody cares what I do. I mean, we're all selfish human beings when you get right down to it. But the goal of the book and the things I write about would be just take a pause and take some new information and see if you're basically happy. Are there different approaches that could increase your enjoyment level? And when I did the model railroading as art book, I had a graphic in there called an audience of one, because none of us are going to the National Gallery of Art. None of us are going to be, Hollywood stars. At the end of the day, we walk into the layout room and we're by ourselves. The only person we need to please is ourselves. And just give some thought to how we approach things and whether there are some things we can do a little bit differently. So when we walk in the layout room, we enjoy the hobby just a little bit more. So when you read a book like this, go through it. Nobody's making you do anything in there, but there may be some things that a year down the road make the experience better for you. And I'm not really afraid of giving people a gentle nudge or a kick in the butt where I think there's areas that hold them back. And one area where I think people historically, when it comes to structures and industries, handcuff themselves is a reluctance to modify a kit. And you had mentioned with yourself, you like the structure, you like the boundaries, and you're probably in the majority, Ray. And I only dedicated 1 page or 2 pages in the book on this, but that approach is good to start, but it is going to be very limiting. Because if your entire layout design has to work around the footprint of a Walters kit, you're boxed into a corner. If you are willing over the years to modify those kits, which isn't that hard, it opens up a whole new world in terms of what you can put on the layout. And it could be just taking the existing kit and changing it from being square to a longer rectangle, or stitching 2 or 3 kits together. So that's one of the points I make in the book, is that you need to give some thought to what's holding you back. And people say, "Well, I spent $50 on this kit. I don't want to ruin it." That $50 is nothing. That's 2 dinners at Panera. My God, it's just. I
Yeah.
mean, but the lessons that you would learn from modifying it will last you for a lifetime. And you are going to screw up 2 or 3. I mean, we've all been there. I've been there. I still screw up kits now. But at some point, if you want to move forward, you need to move ahead and be willing to modify a kit. So that was one thing that I put in there.
That kind of lighted an idea, kind of a thought in my head about this and what you had said about being handcuffed. And it's exactly that. It's almost like chicken egg of sort. And if you start to buy all these structures, you got that closet full of all those Walters kits, and you're not willing to modify them a single bit, and you want to just follow the instructions and build them. Yeah, you are now captive to exactly how those industries are for your track plan. And you may not get exactly what you want. Instead, what you're going to get is kind of like a cookie cutter predetermined plan for what your layouts be.
I wish you had written the introduction of my book. That would be it. So that would do it. The other thing that I kind of, and again, I'm not trying to win a popularity contest. I mean, people are free to buy the book or not, and I think sometimes you can help people if you just kind of lay things out, and if your objective is to help them in the end. And one of the things I talk about is the fascination in our hobby with caricature. In other words, no structure, no industry is of any value unless everything is amped up. You've got kind of this, the craftsman kit guys aren't dummies. So you've got these, everything has to be, a sharp roof line, Victorian architecture, brilliant colors, or it's not worth including. And I think that's kind of is where we're going as a culture anyway. But if you take a look at a lot of the historic architecture, you go into any town, where you talk about the Midwest. I was building a structure in Miami and I thought it was really boring. And I got into it, I was looking at the photos, and I'm like, boy, whoever designed this, there's just a lot of subtleties in terms of the trim work, the insets, and what started out as being what I thought would be a boring structure was pretty fascinating. It was just, something I really treasured having on the layout. So I encourage people to appreciate the mundane or look at the structures more carefully in terms of what these architects put into them. You don't have to have the volume turned up on everything in order for it to be interesting.
Well, and since you really don't want the volume turned up on everything anyway, because you want the things that the volume are turned up on to be heard, right? Or in this case, seen. Where if everything has if everything's flashy, then nothing really stands out.
I think I should have just had you write the book, Ray. I'm going to have you do the introduction next time.
No, I think I've learned quite a bit from you in these conversations and from your books, and I'm starting to understand and see a little bit differently, and it definitely is starting to click a lot for me. Hopefully, I can take that, and after editing podcasts, I can take myself down in my basement and start applying it to the layout that exists down there.
One of the more difficult chapters and it was on visual interest, and it's what we're talking about now, is on one end of the spectrum, you have the craftsman kit movement where you have the really amped up Disney World caricatures. On the other end, unfortunately, you have the modern industrial park where these structures are essentially gray cubes, and they want to be good neighbors. So they have perfectly manicured lawns, and it's just this massive gray cube without any visual interest. And they're prototypically correct, but those aren't that interesting either. So then you're trying to look for a middle ground for something that fits, that isn't too over the top, but has some subtle visual interest also. And for every person, I had a little spreadsheet in there. It's your own decision. It's your layout. Nobody really cares. You have to make your own decisions, but just be aware of what the considerations are going into it.
Yeah, and I'm going through here, and there's a few that hit all of the that you put this matrix together that commonly found, reasonable size footprint, are architecturally interesting, operationally interesting, and there's only a few that go across the board. The rest of them, there's some give and take there.
And a lot of it comes down to weathering too. I mean, if you can get a building that was maybe built 30 or 40 years ago that's just starting to get a little bit of a fade, a little bit of paint peel, the kind of thing that if you weren't paying attention, you would drive by, those are worthy subjects. And I think that's the fun part of the research. If you're, trying to decide what you're going to include, we've got this wonderful tool of Google Street View now. I use an example, Omni Logistics in Miami. It's got a pretty cool logo, faded lettering. It just looks like it fits.
We talk a bit about, kind of the why and everything behind the book. Talk about a little bit of the process of putting all of your thoughts together on this.
I sit down with a piece of paper and I write up an outline. Because usually, I mean, who knows, you get the craziest ideas. You're driving around in the car. I always keep notepads out at the most inconvenient time. When I'm farthest away from the notepad, I get an idea. But I'll just have, a sheet and a half of ideas and supporting marks and highlight those that are important. I put them into MS Word. And then once I decide on the basic content, then I start filling it out. This one took me forever because work got busy. So I picked it up. I'd have a train of thought. Then I had to put it down. But generally, I know I have an outline and then I just start filling out the chapters as I go.
How does it compare to track planning or layout planning? Do you see kind of some parallels between the two, and ideas that you get and what you want to do, and between both doing books and layouts? Does it seem comparable to you?
I think to an extent there is a little bit of it. The one thing that, we're always learning, and that's the fun of it. I would hate to be in a situation, I'll be 65 this year, where I was at the peak of my game. I mean, that would be depressing. Tom Johnson is 10 years older than me. I'll never catch him. We were talking about he's probably the top in the business, but you're always learning. And getting your question, I've talked about this in the blog, and it's something I've become aware of in the last couple of years, is that, at least for me personally, there's nothing that helps increase my level of enjoyment of the hobby and improve my ability as visiting the actual sites. Places just never, in real life, always look 100 times better than they do in a photograph. I mean, a camera doesn't give you the same perspective as the human eye. You can't pick up the size of things. Everything is different. So, from a planning standpoint, if a person asked me for one piece of advice, number one, it would be get on a plane and go there. It's not even that expensive. I'm in Washington, D.C., Maryland. I would fly to Miami, take pictures, come back, be home by 8 o'clock at night. It's not, you rent a car for $50. So, in terms of the planning process and the stuff in the book, there are limits to what you can gain from photographs. The other thing on the planning front is our subject was designed by college trained professional civil and mechanical engineers. I mean, even going back to the 1900s. So if you're stuck taking a pot shed at 101 track plans, which I'm not a fan of, if you're stuck in terms of how to approach something, just go to an aerial photo or a USGS map, study it, and copy it. Because these guys worked it out, 100 years ago, 50 years ago. And if you look at their track diagrams, it's a lot different than what you see in the hobby press because they were not interested in, switchbacks, 15 runarounds, artificial moves and gimmicks to make things interesting. Everything they did was based on efficiency. And I was looking at a track diagram of the Los Angeles Junction, a long spur. I think it was like a 1970s diagram. And I'd never noticed it before. Every single spur, there must have been 30 of them, was oriented the same way. And that meant they didn't have to do a million runarounds. They just did a kind of a back and forth shuffling move. So it kind of gets into your question. Everything on the planning front, rather than reinvent the wheel, rather than taking your cue from the model railroad community, 50% of which have never built a layout, you have to understand that. 60%, 50% of the track plans are by guys that have never built anything. They haven't had the hard knocks to see what works and all the subtleties of what doesn't.
I'm going to take this opportunity to do a shout out to our good friends over at the Second Section podcast, Mike Ostertag and Andy Dorsch. They have a segment of their show I wish I could steal, but it's all theirs, and it's a phenomenal one. When they do the short line of the show, and Mike has been going, I think, kind of alphabetically by state and showing short lines, their locomotive roster, and then he does the same thing. He'll pull up that Google map, and you look at it, and then you say, how could I model this short line? And it goes to your point. Why try to reinvent that wheel? Why? They've already figured it out for you. It's a gift.
That's right.
It's being handed to you. So again, kudos to Mike and Andy for their brilliance of coming up with that short line of the show, because that's exactly that. There's your cheat code. There's your shortcut. If you have a railroad that you like, or you have this idea of industry or what you want to do, look for a short line that serves it, or look for a short line that appeals to you. Then go right to Google Earth and take a look, because there's your track plan. There may be some compression necessary, but the idea is right there for you.
And that is exactly true. And it doesn't even have to be a short line. I mean, you have some pockets, Los Angeles, the Union Pacific in Miami, you have some pockets. And you really gave me a good segue on something that does get tricky. Take exactly what you said. You've got the short line. And even the smallest short line, we have no room as model railroaders compared to what they are. So you draw it all out. And here is where modelers get in trouble. We're going to have to crop things out and selectively compress in order to fit it. And the way that a model railroader immediately would do that is, I will only take the most amped up structures as subjects, and I will only take structures that have an active spur as subjects. And when you do that, it's understandable, but in a subtle way, it's going to look like a toy, because that's not, even going back, decades, that's not the way things really looked. What you would want to do is, if you could classify all the structures based on, 2/3 of them are going to be relatively mundane. So that means, or let's say 3/4. So if you have 3/4 of the structures on the prototype are mundane and 25% are the stars, that should be the ratio on your layout. But if you cherry pick and it becomes just the Victorian homes and the stations and everything with a spur, in a subtle way, it's not going to look like the actual place. And I think that's what we all want, is that we want it to look like the actual place, or something that captivates us about that town. or there's memories or something that makes us feel good. And we want to feel like we're there. And in order to feel like we're there, we have to have the same percentages of mundane and stars of the show. I was telling you that our mutual friend Tom Johnson, I was talking to him on the phone last weekend. He models Indiana, which is where we're both from. And he says, when I go into the layout room, I want to feel like I'm in northern Indiana where I grew up. And I think for most of us, that's our objective. And so getting back to the book, it's if your objective is to be transported to this world where you're going to feel better, how do we go about doing that? And so let's be thoughtful about the process. And part of that, is studying our subject and, not having some self-discipline to get away from the typical model railroad approach of, a coal mine, a pier, and whatever cool kit happened to be on the Walters website this week.
And I'm sure that helps tell a more accurate story to the area that you're modeling.
That's exactly right. And I think I speak for most of us. That is probably the most enjoyable part of the hobby, is to go to these places that are so interesting to us and visit them and try to understand what it is that makes them what they are. And it's not easy. If you take, the really famous painters, over the last 1,000 years, they didn't just go into their studio and whip out a brush. They would spend days at a site studying a specific area. They would do a dozen sketches of a landscape before they even started. And, there's a lesson to be learned there for us. I mean, if you're modeling XYZ town that's important to you, life's short. None of us are guaranteed it tomorrow. You can get the time, go visit the town, take your notepad, take your camera, take some notes, and just try to ask yourself, what is it about this place that makes it what it is that gets my attention? And that's some of the points I try to make in the book.
Yeah, it's going back to that idea of learning to see, right? Learning not only just to see the obvious, but to see the depth and see what's different and being able to pick up on all those things. And that takes time. You can't just look at a photograph once and say, okay, I'm going to model this area. You really, to do it well is to know it well, and to know it well is to be able to learn how to see it.
I can't think of anything that's more satisfying and relaxing to do that. I remember I had been modeling Miami for quite a while, and a local modeler, a friend of mine, said, well, I've never been there, but I want to model. Let's go down there. And he'd only seen it in pictures. And so we get off the plane, we get the rental car, and I pull him into this rattiest industrial park. And his eyes were like saucers. And only a model railroader would appreciate what nerds we are. He goes, oh my God, this city is amazing. It was the biggest hole that you can imagine. Yeah. But they're fading and the graffiti and the palm trees. And he goes, this is amazing. I can see why you want to model it. So that just kind of speaks to that point of learning to see. But he never would have had that experience had he not, pushed me to go down there. And again, I still remember to this day the tickets. I said, yeah, I'll go down there with you, Brad. And so he emailed me like a week later and said, okay, tickets are $120 round trip. That's not that much.
No.
So we went down there, and this is a total sidetrack on that, but we had such a good time, and we had a mutual friend, Bora, who's a rail fan down there. So we rail fanned all day, and we had a rental car. And so we had to go back to the airport, but we'd probably only driven 8 or 9 miles. And I said, well, the rental agreement says you need to top off the gas. And Brad said, Lance, we've gone 8 miles. It's still showing on full. Let's just take it back to the rental car counter. And so this is Ray. This is the common thing I have with you. I said, Ray would say, Brad, rules are rules. We're going to top this off, whatever. So we go to the gas station, and I top it off, and it was like $1.80. He's rolling his eyes. I go into the gas station. I put the card in, $1.80. That triggered the fraud department.
What that's cost you.
So immediately Visa canceled my card. They shut me down. And so Brad had to buy me dinner at the Miami airport because I had no money for food. I had no way to get out of the parking garage at the airport. So anyway, it's a side track.
Oh, that's funny. What $1.80 will cost you for sure.
Yep, but
Yes. So
I was gonna be like Ray. I was gonna play by the rules. Avis said top off the tank, and the $1.80 cost me.
in this book that we've been talking about, again, industry planning for modern era switching layouts, and we're going to share a link on our website to this along with some other links, including Lance's blog. You can find that at aroundthelayout.com/154. You cover so many different types of industries, and it has me wondering, do you have a personal favorite industry that you like to model?
Yeah, I think at this point, people are. I'm gonna have to dial that back because people are really getting sick of me talking about this. The three of them would be any food-based industry, because a food industry, whether it's a bakery, Frito-Lay, has to take a lot of different car types. So you have tank cars, vegetable oil, flour, and box cars. And they only have one or two tracks, so they all have to be sorted by car spots. There's a lot of switching involved, and the structures tend to be interesting. So that would be one. People that follow me are pretty much sick of hearing me talk about that. The other would be a logistics warehouse, where there's kind of the new world order, where if you look at a small town in the 1950s, you'd have one long spur with the same industries. They would all have a lumber yard, coal yard, fuel dealer, lumber yard. What happens in modern times is somewhat similar in that a corporation will build a warehouse next to the track, and they will sublet it to individual customers, which means when you bring that, what looks like a normal warehouse with six doors is actually six different customers, which means they have to be sorted. And so that adds operational interest. And then the last would be the team track, because it's anything goes. I mean, it takes no room, not even a platform sometimes, but any customer in town that wants rail service can come to the team track and be taken care of. So just take Baltimore, for example, or when I was in Nashville, a big industry is waste oil recycling. You get all your service stations, car dealers, Jiffy Lubes that get all this waste oil. What will happen is the railroad will park a tank car on the team track. It's just a track with no structures. And then all of the environmental service companies will come in with their trucks and just pump the oil into them, and off they go. And it's pretty amazing when you think about it, that just this small short track that takes up no room can take so many different car types. You see a lot of center beams for lumber, box cars and brick, you name it. So those would be the three.
Oh, you talk about team track and operational interest. Now you can really keep your operating sessions different because you could be one industry to the other between operating sessions on that team track.
That's right. And in some places, you will have, take CSX in Miami, there'll be a section of the spur that's just not that busy, and they know it. So they will call up the customer and say, okay, your car's coming in. We're going to drop it at the end of the branch. We need to get that unloaded. So they will just, there's not even a dedicated track. They'll just kind of drop it at the end of the main, and the customers will come in a pickup truck and unload it.
What are your thoughts on the commercial based kits that are out and available?
Walters does a really good job, I think. And where this hobby would be without them on the structure side, I don't know. I mean, they've kind of got a monopoly, but I would like to see them have more modern era kits, but they do a pretty darn good job. When I see these new offerings, I'm like, yeah, that's something we need. So I would just like to see them, particularly in the last 15 years. I'm not seeing a lot of quirky stuff. The stuff they bring out does have real world application. They know the money is in the steam to diesel transition era, but young people are still coming into the hobby. They don't want that. They want what they can see. So I'm just hoping that we'll see a trend towards more modern era, more selections with modern era kits. We're getting there. I just hope it continues.
So again, industry planning for small era switching layouts, another book from Lance Mindheim. He has quite a collection. Do you think you got another one in you, Lance?
Oh yeah, I think I'm not really the retirement type. And so, I'll probably do this until I drop. I know what the next one's going to be. I'm still recovering from this last one, but the thing that we run into in this hobby that is a problem that very few people are aware of, is we are at a time where we have never had so much great information, particularly with YouTube, which lends itself so well to these how-to videos, blogs, Facebook, everything you need to know mostly is out there. But here's the problem. We have so much information, we have no path of putting it into context in terms of what is most important, where do we put our priorities? We've got it's just almost information overload, having so much noise it can be hard to move forward. And the title of the book, if I start it, would be Student, I think, what's the title? Student to Master, The Lifelong Path to Model Railroad Excellence. And even though it's going to be directed towards a high school student, which ideally I think people would start, it would be these are the skills you need to know, and these are where they fit into context. And I'm going to break it into two groups. One would be the emphasis of the hobby now, which is more of the mechanical side of things, the aspects that have guardrails. But the problem with that is the true excellence to get to the Tom Johnson, Mike Confalone, Sebastian SG level, the artistic end has to reign supreme. And so at some point, you have to understand that if you only go after the technical end, you're going to have an architectural model, which may be fine. But if you really want to get to the upper level, you need to switch and expand your horizons to more artistic concepts, which deal with composition, complex brush strokes, color theory. And the reason people don't like that is it's really hard. There's no formula. You can't take out a kit direction and say 1 + 1 = 2, glue this part to that part. To get to the level of these true masters, it's an entirely different world. So that would be the next book. Is number one, showing the weight of importance on specific areas. Where do people need to put their emphasis, and kind of walk them through that path.
Hopefully, maybe in the next or subsequent books, you can start to help me get out of my objective mind and more into a subjective mind. Put my rule book away and pick up a book that helps me broaden my artistic mind quite a bit
You have
more.
a family member that's going to push you in that direction one way or the other.
I sure do. My youngest is knocking it out of the park, and she's having a blast doing it. It is certainly her thing, and I need to spend some more time with her and see how she's seeing the world, and start to understand that a bit more, because it will certainly help my view as I try to turn my layout into something more of a better simulation of the areas that I model. So, Lance Mindheim, want to thank you again for coming on Around the Layout and sharing all about your latest book.
Thank you, Ray. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.